As I was introduced, hi, I'm Chad Stoller. I'm the Global Chief Innovation Officer, and I work for For those of you who, a lot of you might know but some things that people don't realize is that we have 150 offices around the world, but more importantly, we have 5,000 employees. And of those 5,000 employees, one of the things that I'm very proud of is that all of these people are innovators at heart. And my job is actually pretty easy. My job is to give them structure, to help them, give them room, give them evidence to bring new ideas to our clients. And sometimes it's not always about what to do, right? But it's about how to do it in the right way. So innovation is very important for us, and it's also very important for our industry. I like to use this set of slides here as a brief history of time. Because over here, we have some sort of signage that came from maybe cave dwellers. And maybe this was for a carne asado taco. I mean, it could be, right, over here on the left. But then over here, just about 18 months ago, this was a Snapchat filter for Cinco de Mayo in the United States, where people played with it for about 20 seconds, and over 150 million people used it. So we've gone, as you can see, in a very short amount of time to some pretty interesting new formats of advertising. And it's not hard to understand that, because if you look at this slide, which is basically about content platform innovation over the last 65 years, you can see that especially in the last 15, there's been a lot of devices out there that are competing for content to rob consumers of their attention. And it's very interesting because since the history of time, one thing has remained constant, is that as human beings, we only have a certain amount of time. Over the course of a 24-hour day, our time is constant. However, every day, there's more content competing for that attention. And that attention is actually something very important to think about, because a study that was done in 2000 found that the average human being had 12 seconds of attention. In 2013, it got reduced to 8 seconds. Our friend the goldfish here that's swimming around can maintain their attention for 9 seconds. So it's pretty true, okay, is that a goldfish can maintain their attention more than a typical human being. And this has changed a lot of different ways that we work. Right? So, how many of you grew up in this business where we worked with a particular funnel, where we went from discovery down all the way down into action, but now, people can get an idea from anywhere. At any given moment, somebody becomes a shopper. So this is something that's very important for all of us at because what we have to think about is that if any moment somebody can be inspired, how do we meet them at that right moment in order to meet them with a message? And this is what we're dealing with right now. We're dealing with people like this, okay? And the fact is that we can look at this and we can laugh. We all know somebody who's done this. It could have been us. But frankly, there's two things that strike me about this. One is, what was it that was capturing that person's attention? Because the fact is that I want to be a part of that. But then more importantly, what worries me is about where is my client's media investment? Because the fact is that clearly it's not doing its job because it's not in the place that's capturing this attention. So what we do is we have a very, very narrow focus about what is important to us. Lots of agencies will talk to their brands and come up with great innovation ideas. Well, we're going to build a new product for you, or we're going to change the way that you might sell food in your restaurants or something like that. That's all great. But what we find is most interesting to our clients is when we can bring them new ideas, opportunities, and tactics that fall into these 4 primary categories. We believe content is what consumes people's attention. Formats are the ways that we can put ourselves into the conversation. Platforms is what aggregates all of that attention. And lastly, what is the new formats of data and performance? How is measurement changing where we can get new insights into what is working and what isn't? And what guides us is that we're very fortunate to have a group of people called the IPG Media Lab. And the Media Lab is a very interesting group. For over 12 years, the lab has been studying what we refer to as media futures, which are the new sources of audience interest. And what we do is we look at that interest and we try to get an understanding as to why is this compelling, but most importantly, are these platforms ready for advertising? They meet with over 300 new partners a year. And lastly, through a research methodology, we actually publish results based on media trials. And the course of every year, what we do is we look at a bunch of different territories. And this is actually a 2017 territory map, these are categories that we believe are very interesting for advertisers. And it's one thing to have territories, but it's another thing to be able to guide people as to how to explore innovation, an innovation roadmap. So what we do is we look at all opportunities and we measure them on two unique axes. The first is we look at reach. What is that territory's opportunity to aggregate attention? But then most importantly, how ready are they for advertising? And when we plot out a whole series of various territories on a map, we come up with three categories that are very unique to us. We refer to them as the 90, the 9, and the 1. 90% are areas of innovation that give you high reach and you get high return on advertising. You know that this is something that works. The 9% are areas that are proving themselves to actually warrant investment and are starting to show client success. And then lastly, the 1% are the areas where nobody really knows if this is going to be something for advertising or not. Chances are it is, but in its current format, it's not ready for advertising. So what we like to do is we put them on a map, and then from there, we actually work with our clients based on their business objectives, and then from there, we actually go and we explore. And this is something that works very well for us around the world. So for the purposes of this conversation, and I know that we wanted to talk about the roller coaster of everything that's out there, what I wanted to do is talk about a whole bunch of these things. So in about 28 minutes and 42 seconds, I'm going to cruise through a lot of different slides. So let's start with the 90. So the 90 are the areas where I don't think I have to convince anybody here that this is where clients should be looking at and actually should be taking seriously. However, sometimes this is like the classic, one thing that's nice about coming to Asia and you talk to people about, whether it's mobile technology or some things that are very progressive, you never have a problem especially with Asian-based clients. In the United States, my favorite thing was like 3 or 4 years ago is you would talk to clients and you would talk to them about doing something in mobile and they would look at you and they would say, yeah, but it's not really going to catch on. And then they go back down to their phone, right? So the fact is that 90%, these are things that tend to be very obvious. Gaming is something that's very important for us, okay? Is that gaming is a culture that people still want to talk about as something that lives in basements. But the fact is that gaming is stronger than it ever has been before. There's over 400 million gamers that are out there. But the perception is that gamers are people that are sitting on couches, okay? They might even be in your basement. But the fact is there's two things that people don't necessarily think about. One is, how many people here who are adults grew up with a Nintendo? Right? Come on, are you kidding me? There we go. All right. The fact is, you're now older, okay? You probably are still entertained by it. But the fact is that gamers have moved, they've matured, they buy cars, they buy nice things, they probably go to that mall that's next door, which is ridiculous. But the fact is that you have over 1.75 billion mobile devices, okay, that were used last year to play games. Is that gamers they're not people who are sitting on couches playing games. It's anybody with a mobile phone is playing games, and they find the time to play. The next is branded content. I don't think I need to convince anybody here that the more relevant an advertising message is, the more likely it's going to resonate. And you're seeing big brands work with talent in order to actually immerse themselves into various social conversations. Dynamic creative is something that we feel very strongly about, is that if you can reach somebody with the right time, in the right place, you better have the right message. Otherwise, it's an impression that's left on the table. And surveys show that 94% of marketers believe the more addressable you can actually get an ad unit, the more likely it is to resonate. And the fact is that we have brands that are working in dynamic creative, whether it's just using public available information and triggers, right? Just simple things based on the time of day, maybe it's the weather or a user's location. But then we'll also work with a lot of our brands to figure out how can we use their first-party data, okay, to get a better understanding as to who this customer is, what type of actions they've taken on our properties, and from there, look to deliver messages that don't just go on display or on mobile, but they move all over the place. And so whether it's using addressable messaging for everything from email to high-end video products, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Then there's dating apps. Dating apps are something that's really funny, is that there's still a lot of people who talk about dating apps and they can't believe what they just talked about. But the fact is that it's now become so socially acceptable, and these are platforms that are so rich for audience engagement. The average person who's an online dater is checking this app 4 times a day. Right? Right now, we generally think that most people who keep going back and checking apps are social applications, right? Which generally can be a high cost. But the fact is, this is under-leveraged opportunities. And you're seeing brands use dating apps in these really fun ways where they're using it for really kind of sophisticated messaging. But then there's also brands out there that are just like, listen, we'll get into this conversation too. How about a pizza? It's as simple as that. Chatbots, it's more about bringing AI directly into conversations. A good chatbot can handle some significant inbound questions that come in, and you can actually reduce a lot of customer service. And then more people are being comfortable, and they're also, they understand that if they can be talking directly to a chatbot in a particular service, as long as they're getting the answers that they want. And we're seeing high-end services, like whether it's credit cards and dealing with everything from getting advice to something to customer service. A lot of people are using these environments, using chat for a conversation. The next is location marketing. And what I think is very interesting is that location marketing, most people assume, let's just target people based on where it is that they are. But the fact is, the data of where somebody is much more valuable to me. Because the fact is that most cases you're competing with other people to have a message in a particular place instead of leveraging the data that basically tells you that somebody who was at this place is now available to talk to them in another place. So, huge is a big thing for automotive manufacturers. Everybody wants to reach somebody when they're on the particular lot of a car instead of thinking about, I want to reach somebody who was on this lot but also went to 2 or 3 competitive lots but talk to them 2 days later. That gives you a new type of audience segment. Then we also have location reputation, which is also something that's very important for us. These are US-based statistics, but something that's very interesting is that 28% of people who have searched for a local store, 28% of people who had searched for a local store actually wound up buying something from that particular store. And what's interesting is that there's a tremendous amount of growth of people searching near me. And now that most searches are moving away from the desktop and moving into tablet and mobile, location is becoming a primary factor, right? So now when we get our search results, it's one thing to get the relevance of our search result, but it's another thing to also understand proximity, that something is close. But the fact that's driving the algorithm is ratings. So ratings that exist, and whether they're on a Google page, your own brand's web page, or third parties, these are all part of a whole new algorithm that is out there, which is basically it's driving what the top 3, 4, 5 search results are in a local-oriented search. So smart brands are figuring out ways to optimize their location ratings. So the same way that websites were looking at figuring out better ways to optimize their website for better search results, smart brands are starting to think about how can they do this at retail, because it does 2 things. The first is that if they can drive somebody who has a good experience to leave a positive review, it's going to drive their results, but more importantly, it's going to continue to attract more and more customers. It's a very good cycle for a lot of brands to invest in. Now we're going to move into the 9. The 9 are areas where we believe that there's some things that are actually very interesting here. They're starting to prove themselves as good destinations for advertising, good sources of data, and most importantly, they're starting to reach an audience that's very interesting. Now, the first one's podcasting. In the United States, podcasting is exploding in popularity. Everybody wants to talk about what their favorite podcast is. Here's the problem, is that nobody can prove it. So you can be on a subway, or you could talk to people in their cars and ask them what radio stations they listen to, and they'll all tell you, well, I listen to my podcast. But there's no way to prove it. And mostly that's because depending on who you ask, 75 to 80% of the marketplace is dominated by Apple, which doesn't release any data. But all of that is changing, okay? Apple is out there, and they're basically saying that they are going to start they're looking at podcasters as content creators and also as influencers. Influencers that have a significant amount of reach, and these are people that can actually start making money in this ecosystem. So they are going to start releasing data on this. And the data will be interesting because now we will have the opportunity to understand what podcasts are downloaded, how long did they actually listen to, did they listen past the actual point of an ad? And so what's happening now is that this release of this data is actually going to take podcasting and start turning it into a premier digital audio advertising format. So what's fascinating about it is that podcasting is for everybody, okay? It's not just for one particular market. One thing that's very strong about podcasts in the United States is that there's a tremendous amount of foreign language podcasts that are out there, which allow people to be back in touch, whether with their, whether if they've moved away from their homes or something like that, whether it's getting the news, understanding culture, entertainment, etc. So it's all over the place. And it's been something that small brands, especially precision-oriented brands, have been using for years. They can advertise in a podcast, have a vanity URL, and they see the registrations and the signups that they get. So there's small brands out here, like I'm sure here in here in Singapore, there's not a lot of people talking about Squarespace or DaVinci or Harry's Shave, but the fact is that you have heard of GE and you have heard of BMW. These are brands that have actually adopted podcasting, and they've understood that this is where the dollars that they traditionally were investing in radio and digital audio, this is where things are moving. Esports. There's no better place to talk about esports than in Asia, but there's some interesting things about it, right? First of all, it's a global phenomenon. It's 400 million people, okay, that are tuning into esports coverage, or whether it's a local, or going to local events, or watching broadcast streams and so forth. And what's fascinating about esports for us is that it's the fastest growing sport that's out there, but then what's also crazy about it is that the global footprints of the interest are growing at a pace where they're almost matching soccer as a sport that truly is this global phenomenon based on all the different markets. But what I find the most interesting thing about esports is that esports is digital by design, but also digital from day one. So if you think about it, this is a sport that doesn't have to deal with legacy broadcasting rights, okay? There's no blackouts, there's no problems with a broadcast or anything like this. This is a sport that's been designed for a culture that knows exactly how they want to consume their content. And so we think it's very fascinating. And you're already seeing big brands jump in, whether it's Red Bull doing their events, or even Coca-Cola with their Esports Weekly podcast and also video series. Over-the-top streaming, and this is going to be a very US-centric portion of the presentation, but the fact is that nobody graduates college in the United States now and says, finally, I can buy cable. Things like that don't happen anymore, okay? Is that people are realizing that all of the programming that is of interest to them is provided to them through a variety of different services. And so right now we have 67% of users are now using streaming services, which is much more than the 61% that actually has a cable subscription. So what's happening is that brands are realizing that they have to figure out a way to input themselves in this type of moment. Okay, so whether that's building applications, which was about 3 years ago, everybody was racing to do. Now smart brands are realizing that there's probably a better way to do that with some more advanced addressable targeting. But then at the same time, realizing that when you start to advertise in video, in environments that are interactive by nature, your ads should also be interactive. So this was just a test that we did just to find out what kind of engagement could you get if you allowed the user to be able to just use their remote control during a commercial. And so we let them move a BMW around, let them look at different angles, check out different colors. The engagement rates blew way past our expectations of this, is that people have this tool that's in their hand and they want to be able to use it. So this is something that we're getting a lot more brands excited about. The next is live video. Live video is a fascinating thing for us. We know that people like when brands, if their brands are getting involved in something that they're interested in, they'd be curious to see what goes on, whether it's something that's backstage or whether it's a live event, is that people want to get involved and they want to see something that is more of a moment-based versus something that's been recorded or something like that. And so you see a lot of big popular brands that go after millennials and teens and so forth. You got your Doritos, even at Pepsi, you have a lot of those brands. But what's fascinating is that live is so important that you have all of the big video providers out there now starting to bid on things that people probably thought they didn't belong with. So if a year and a half ago, Twitter purchased the rights to broadcast NFL games because they figured, well, we're a popular app that people like to use when they're watching football. Let's start broadcasting live football. And it actually was pretty good. It was pretty interesting. They didn't renew. That's because Amazon is now doing that as well. So Amazon outbid them for the rights to have NFL football. We are now at this point where 3 to 5 years from now, we are going to see in the United States a lot of rights expire when it comes to these big broadcast cable deals. And with these cable deals, what's going to happen is that they're going to be outbid by whether it's Google and YouTube, or whether it is Twitter, whether it's Amazon, or it could be even Apple and some other brands. So live video is so important because that is at the end of the day on television, it's what most people are watching, and so the big media companies all want to capture that. Next is social commerce. And this becomes very fascinating, which is we're seeing now a whole new slew of ad products that are coming out in social environments that are all commerce driven. So if you look at Pinterest, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, everybody has this way to easily turn people from browsers into shoppers and from shoppers into buyers. And what's happening is that people are very easily influenced when it comes to buying in social media channels. That's because a lot of brands are using, whether they're influencers, micro-influencers, or just using the advanced targeting to understand this is somebody who might be interested in their product. And they're buying not only from ad units, but when you look at WeChat makes it also very easy to buy, and that they're doing a pretty good job of converting users into shoppers. So I talked a little bit before about micro-influencers. So influencer marketing is something that continues to grow. And it's one thing to hire a very famous celebrity to do that one tweet or that one Instagram post. And for some brands, that works. And it works well for things like awareness. As like Matt was talking about before, it's great that you got all that awareness, but did it really help? How do you make things more relevant? And so what smart brands are doing is they're realizing that they need to start working with smaller influencers. It's one thing to have an influencer that can reach 50 million people, but some brands are saying this is a person who reaches 50,000 people who are most likely to be receptive to the product that I have. So what's happening is that influencer marketing works, but it only really works well when you work with the right, most relevant people. The challenge is scale. So I put this in here because it's not innovative to think about that, about the fact is that, oh, I should use somebody who's really relevant for my customer. That's not innovation. That's just being obvious and smart. But the innovation comes to looking at all the different platforms that are out there that allow you to reach these micro-influencers, review their work, and create some sort of workflow where you can operationalize this the same way that you might operationalize some other forms of media. This is something that's very important. Then there's cross-screen measurement. We have all these devices, and we have all these different companies that are protecting their data. And it's critical for our brands to start figuring out a way to accept the fact that this number is only going to continue to grow. And that number is the average amount of devices that are in a US household. So there's 11.9 devices, if you think about that, right? Whether it is a connected television or a computer, whether it's a phone or the variety of tablets that are in the house. The fact is there are more screens than ever before, screens that are capturing attention, and we're getting a tremendous amount of duplication of audiences. And we need to figure out a way to not only manage and optimize our media plans accordingly so we can avoid duplication issues, but even more, figuring out how can we, in a situation like this, create sequential-based ad systems, okay, where we know that we exposed somebody once in one format and we started telling our story here. How do we continue the story in other formats? Then digital out-of-home. In the United States, digital out-of-home continues to grow. It's not growing at the rate that it is in other countries, but the fact is that digital out-of-home provides much more real-time experience, okay? You can have content that is much more dynamic. You can have it locally based, but also at the same time, the experiences can be better. And so whether it is doing takeovers at certain times of the day in certain particular areas, to even starting to think about how can you deliver very unique experiences in places that you might use regular outdoor in a traditional way. But the part that's most amazing is that when people start looking at digital out-of-home as a medium to execute on insights that you get from location-based data, that's when things get really interesting and also very exciting. Because now what you can actually do is understand this is my market and they're in a particular place and I want to do something with them. And so that's a very good tactic to use. Brands are starting to warm up to 360 video. It gives users a completely different perspective about a product. Works really well in automotive advertising. It works well for experiences, especially when you're promoting movies. And what's happening is that consumers are actually raising their hand and they're admitting, you know what, I have used something like this and I got instructions on my phone and then all of a sudden I was moving around. And what's happening is that people are starting to realize it's an interesting way to do storytelling, and most importantly, it's warming themselves up to this idea of virtual reality. Here's something that Major League Baseball does. Major League Baseball actually did something where they put you in the batter's box and you're facing live pitching. Next, conversational interfaces. So this is an area that I don't think a lot of people saw blowing up at the pace that it did. But basically, the speakers that are now sold to you by Amazon, Google, and now Apple, and a variety of other products that are trying to cut deals with companies like Microsoft for their Cortana service, people are talking to devices and they're getting answers. Now, what's fascinating for me is that what happens is we move people away from a visual medium, such as using their computer or their phone. For years, we've always looked at search as the #1 indicator of intent. But in a situation like this, when you're asking somebody what the weather is or the pollen count, all we get is an answer. We don't get ads. So brands have to understand this. And the thing is that people are realizing that these speakers don't just do answers, they also have applications. And so you can see the growth. And so this number is around 20,000. Somebody told me the other day that actual number is around 22 to 25,000, depending on who it is you talk to. That's significant growth of brands and services that are building up apps and skills for these types of speaker systems. And here's what most people are using them for. The holy grail is to get you up there to the top, to order products, right? That means a lot for somebody like Amazon. But the thing is, you're not going to jump in there right away. You have to start with your baby steps. And what most people do is general questions. What's the weather, right? What time is it? How long should I, boil this water for, or something along those lines. People are just asking this type of stuff. And then once they get a little bit of confidence, they start moving up the ladder. Okay, they're starting to ask it, they're getting localized information about their weather. They're then getting into streaming music. They're connecting their home to it. And then eventually what's happening is people have the confidence where they could just reorder something or buy something that's new. And, something like, smart brands are trying to jump in there first. And this is something that Johnson & Johnson and Zyrtec did with an Alexa skill as well for allergies. Next is visual search, which is two kind of factors that are colliding together into this category. The first is that people are realizing that their cameras or their phones can actually do more than just take pictures. They can actually use it as a lens for searching. So whether you're using the Pinterest product to identify what it is that's in somebody's home and then figure out what the product page is. It's pretty popular with fashion. Most of the time they get it wrong, but still, it's still something that's interesting. But what I find even more interesting is that on one side, you have an emerging technology behavior, right, which is using AI and using augmented reality to understand what products are. But the other side is, how many of you have looked on Instagram before you've gone to a restaurant, right? The same way you've gone to TripAdvisor to actually look at photos. Image search is a behavioral change. What's happening is people are going to image-rich environments. And so whether it's Pinterest or whether it's Instagram, these are two searches here just for Nike sneakers. But the fact is that sometimes people just want to see results. They don't want to read results. And so it's a behavioral change that a lot of smart brands are starting to realize that what is SEO and what is search and what is SEM for this type of behavioral change. Next is retail disruption. A lot of retailers are changing the way that they operate. In the United States, Amazon's been opening up stores. Ironically, they were first billed as bookstores, which is actually really funny. But the fact is they use them as a way to actually sell all of their Amazon electronics products. But my favorite part is that they take all the data that they have online and they build it into the retail stores to create discovery. Amazon's probably biggest problem is discovery. Like if any of you are avid readers, there's nothing better than walking into a bookstore. You get wonderful ideas on books to read, right? You can always judge a book by its cover in a way. But the fact is that on Amazon, it's an impossible experience to actually browse books the same way you buy it in a bookstore. But you're not buying it in a bookstore, you're taking a picture of the book and you're buying it later. Anyway. But other stores are trying to figure, and brands and retailers are trying to figure out ways where they can blend an online experience with an offline experience. This was a really interesting experiment that the Gap did with Virgin Hotels. This was a year and a half ago, where they basically said, you're going to Chicago, that's great, just shop this Gap site and we'll have everything in your room. It was kind of an interesting idea. And then Best Buy, which is a big retailer in the United States, they actually just put a 24/7 robot in the entry of their store. So if you ever need headphones, a Kindle, or anything that's flat that can go in a box that's about this big, you can actually walk up to it like you could in an ATM, and from there actually buy your products. And then you have other things which is really fun. This is one of my absolute favorite cases. Kate Spade just took a store that wasn't even open. They just used the window of a store, and they just let people text in what it was they want, and then it was delivered directly to them. And then most recently, Adidas and Alexander Wang did this great program where they just basically did outdoor snipes. These are posters that you buy. They're usually like $2 a piece or something like that. And then from there, they hung them up, and you just texted in what it was that you wanted, and it got delivered directly to you. So next is the 1%. These are probably the things that you came here to see. These are not necessarily figured out yet. No one really knows what the answer is going to be. However, we do know that these are things that clients are asking us about, media asks us about, we all ask each other quite a bit about. So first is augmented reality, and we see these projections that there's going to be 1 billion active users globally for AR. I don't think that means it's people with a HoloLens, okay, on their head in their kitchen trying to do this. I don't know what this is. If you look at this video, this is a guy who's designing a home, but while he's there, he's also figuring out, like, I think, he is going to Maui, but he's checking the weather, but then at the same time, he's concerned about recipes because he's in the kitchen. That's not what it's going to be. Augmented reality is going to start with very useful applications. And if you look at 2 brands that are doing it really well, here they are. The first is IKEA, okay? IKEA knows exactly what it is that they're doing. People are buying furniture that doesn't have a lot of commitment to it, and they just want to see what it looks like in their home. So their app is very simple. You can look at a chair, take a picture, see what it is, text it directly to your significant other, and get permission to buy it. Amazon just launched last week, and this one's really great. It's their AR view, and you can look at various products that they sell and place them directly into your environment. It doesn't work for everything, but it works well for like the Echo speakers and stuff like that. If you haven't tried it out yet, try it out because it's pretty cool. But then what generally boosts new technologies, especially technologies that come with mobile, is when Apple says that they're bringing it to you. There's been so many great technologies out there that have existed before, but then when Apple puts their brand name on it, calls it a product, and puts it in a commercial, then everybody wants to run out and use it. So we've all been talking about augmented reality for 3 years, 4 years or so, but the fact is that when Apple starts running commercials where you have a T-Rex running around a basketball court, people get curious. The next is virtual reality. And I know that there's going to be some sessions later today about VR, but VR is something that I think is very important to just kind of really just set the table on, okay? First is that there's a lot of headsets that are out there. There's also a tremendous amount of headsets that are unsold, okay? 2 years ago, when Oculus came out and basically talked about when they were shipping their first primary consumer product, 3% of computers that were in market could actually run the VR experiences. So the fact is that if you want to have a premium VR experience, it's still very expensive. But of course, everyone wants to jump on it, so you have a lot of brands that are out there, and they're all doing these kind of fun VR-like experiences because it's always fun to attach yourself to something that's new. But I also feel like these companies do VR a tremendous disservice. All somebody needs to do right now is have one bad experience in VR. And oftentimes, that comes at the expense of Google Cardboard and some bad 360 video, and then people are like, I tried VR, it's shit. But some brands get into it, and they do it right. And so in this particular case, whether it's Red Bull, who's always done a very good job with pretty much anything that it is that they do, because they're also very consumer-centric and they understand what they want. But then whether it's Star Wars, okay, who put out their speeder video and so forth. But there's 2 aspects of working in VR, which I think is very, very important. If I can leave you with one thing about VR, is you have to understand there's 2 experiences. So you have one experience here on the left. This is Dean Takashi, for those of you who don't know who he is. He's a video game journalist and so forth. You can see he's using this HTC Vive setup here, or this could be an Oculus setup, I'm not quite sure. But he's in a very fixed experience, right? It probably took him 10 minutes to get going, okay? It's difficult, he can't really move. These are expensive experiences, and they don't scale. Over here on the right, you have somebody using Google Cardboard. Does everybody here use Google Cardboard? Everybody here has used Google Cardboard, keep your hands up. Keep your hands up. How many of you used an Oculus or a Vive or something like that? So you see the numbers dipping. This is hard. This is easy. This experience is great. This is a little lightweight and portable. So we're at a very interesting crossroads with VR, and what's going to happen is in the next 2 years, we are going to see a significant change. And products have already been announced, and this is something to keep your eye on in this space. We're going to see a headset come in at around a $500 to $600, $700 US price point, which is going to be a rich experience that is a lot more free. Hands-free, you can move around, you can actually walk and stuff like that. That, to me, is going to be the VR platform to start paying attention to. Next are 5G innovations, and this is something where no brand basically says, oh, great, get me on some of that 5G stuff. It's not it. 5G is infrastructure. Okay? And this is what's going to allow us to start connecting our clients with experiences that we've always talked about but have never been able to do. You're going to see at CES this year, everybody is going to be talking about the products that they have that can be networked wirelessly through various forms of infrastructure, and it's all going to be tied directly to the explosion of 5G services. And so from now, when we've talked about trying to do that great live experience someplace, but we haven't had the ability to do it, we're now going to be able to. And whether it's everything from streaming concerts or live events, we're going to have that opportunity. The next is this mobile light era that we're starting to think about. Anybody here have the new Apple Watch with cellular? Try it out. It will change your life because you'll leave your house without your phone. And there's actually something really nice about it, something that's very interesting. There's a lot of older consumers who basically said the highlight of the last iPhone announcement wasn't the iPhone 8, wasn't the iPhone 10. It was a watch that they could leave the house with and not miss a text message from their kid or their loved one, or they could always take a phone call. So what's happening is that if mobile experiences start moving away from a screen, we have to start thinking about what is that next destination. And that could be the wrist, and whether that is through forms of haptic-based advertising. When we walk by certain stores, or is our wrist going to vibrate? I don't know the answer, but we put this in the 1% because we know this is something that we have to look out for. Next are connected cars. In the United States, there's projections there could be 250 million of these in the entire world. I don't know where these numbers really come from. And at the same time, I don't necessarily know if a connected car just simply means it has built-in Wi-Fi or internet connectivity. But the fact is cars are changing. Okay, I just saw there was an article today that Waymo, which is Google's division of self-driving cars, which essentially a self-driving car is the most connected car on the planet. But these cars are now on the streets without even drivers inside of them. Okay, and Google's running at a pace right now where it's clear that by January at CES, they want to make some pretty significant press announcements. But the fact is that when cars start driving themselves, it really changes a lot of things. That slide I showed you before about the amount of time that we have, a connected self-driving car returns time back to the media pool, right? What is that 2 hours away that 2 hours a day that somebody commutes every day and we can get that time back? We have to really start thinking about that. And we have to think about the services that are going to control them. So in this particular case, whether it's like an OnStar service that General Motors uses, we're seeing brands start to integrate themselves with it. So with that, I'm out of time, but I got here within some time, so thank you. From a media perspective, of everything that I put up there, first of all, there's a lot of things out there, Lee. Thanks for that pressure. I look at it depends on who I am, right? If I am somebody who is looking to sell direct, podcasting. I just think it's so incredibly underleveraged. In fact, it's priced based on the fact that there aren't analytics for it. It's going to be one of these things where we have advertisers in the United States that are investing in it now to set their rates because they know that once Apple releases this data, the rates are going to skyrocket. If I wasn't, and I was a retailer, I'd be investing in my location reputation because it's a very easy thing to do. There's still a lot of brands out there that chase negative reviews instead of thinking about how do you bring in more positive reviews. And it's just one of these things that people aren't paying attention to. But all searches now are pretty much, I mean, it's a gross overstatement of what I'm saying, but all searches now to me that are relevant are mobile-based searches.
All right, any more questions from the audience?
Yep.
Yes.
Hi, thanks. That was a lovely session. My question is for B2B marketeers, should we say that past are the days of webinars and we should start looking at, webinars is the current latest hot thing, right? It's been in the market for a while and we feel as a B2B marketer, that's a good way to reach out to audiences, but we never talk about podcasts that much. So do you think we should, for B2B marketers, podcasts, again, are a good medium to reach out?
I think you have to think about, I want to make sure that I heard you correctly, you're talking about for broadcast advertising for B2B?
Well, not really for advertising, but as a B2B marketer, from getting my message out to my customers. So I'm not talking as an advertiser, I'm talking as a content distributor, as a marketer. We leverage a lot of webinars to reach out to our audiences because they're a good medium for us to educate people. But we never think too much about podcasts. So I think my question is not from a media perspective, but as a marketer.
Yeah, I mean, I think that broadcasting is moving into in my opinion, especially when it comes to broadcast content, it's moving into two different kinds of cluster. One is content, and content is, people are realizing that content no longer is on a schedule. Unless it's a live event. Live events to me are live video, are moving towards live video, and everything else to me is moving as a commodity-based content where people know where it is they're going to get it. Like I said before, nobody's graduating college and deciding they're going to sign up for a Sky subscription or, or a cable subscription. So what's happening is that you have to figure out what is it that your particular customer wants. The good news is, and it's hard news for a lot of people that manage investments when it comes to broadcasting, is that data is going to rule. And the more, so I think the answer to your question is you have to look at the data and you have to make an investment in trying to understand what data tells you where your customer is, and from there making decisions that way.
Sure, great, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a question from the young lady. Yes.
Diversification of audiences is a real issue for marketers.
Yeah.
So could you share your thoughts on where you see that going and who's
Sure.
going to take the initiative to solve it?
So I can only really talk about it from a U.S. perspective, but that's where a lot of the pain, a lot of our pain comes from. So what's happening now, as I understand it, and we have actually a team of people part of the Magna Intelligence Group, and we can actually get you a lot more details on this, is it requires broadcasters to basically tag their content in an appropriate way where we will know as to whether or not we are reaching this audience twice. And what's happening is that there's a tremendous amount of hesitation from the broadcasters to participate. Broadcasters that have nothing to lose are more than happy to do this because they are going to say, we want to do this, we want to actually get some new dollars to flow in. Broadcasters that are concerned about it are the ones where there's a little bit of hesitation. So it's not necessarily something that the industry can say, this is the way we're going to measure it. We need help on the broadcast side of things, and we're not getting it.
I'll catch you later for a follow-on.
Okay,
Thanks.
I can.
Any more questions? Okay, so I think that's it for you,
right.
Chad. Thank you
Thank you.
very much for your presentation.